Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Melissa Madara to discuss The Witch's Feast, a kitchen grimoire, a decadent collection of enchanting dishes revealing the storied history and seductive art of magical cooking. Melissa Jane Madara is a witch, herbalist, storyteller, and chef. They are a co-owner of Catland Books, editrix at Benefica magazine, and the curator of Catland's private courtyard garden, where they grow a variety of medicinal, magical, and poisonous plants. Melissa's work as a chef has been experimental, running the gamut from traditional French pastry to molecular gastronomy to health-focused meal planning. Their magical practice is similarly eclectic, inspired by the praxis of chaos magic, with most of their research focused on ancient religions, traditional witchcraft, and plant folklore. Melissa has been featured in the New York Times, Vogue, and many other media outlets. Their work on kitchen witchcraft has been featured in Vice. To moderate this evening's conversation, we're joined by Lisa Marie Basile, an author, editor, and poet based in New York City. She's the author of Light Magic for Dark Times, The Magical Writing Grimoire, and City Witchery, along with a few books of poetry. She is the founding editor of Luna Luna magazine, and her work has appeared in the New York Times, Catapult, Narratively, Cunning Folk, and more. Lisa Marie is also a chronic illness and foster youth advocate. In both her magic and advocacy work, she aims to focus on accessibility and creativity, as well as the magic in the mundane. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of The Witch's Feast from Books and Books below. Thank you for supporting indie bookstores. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual screen. Hello, hello.
Hi everyone.
Welcome.
Hi,
Hi, Lisa.
everyone. Hello. So nice to see you all. And hello. Nice to see
So
you.
good to be here.
So I'm really excited to talk to you tonight. I am obsessed with this book. I've read it. I'm in love with it. And I'm so honored to get the chance to talk to you. I just think that this is the perfect book to meld magic, cooking, history, and I think there's something in it for literally everyone. So I'm going to dive into a series of questions, and hopefully we can just chat about your magic and this incredible book. So
For sure.
Kick it off with this first question. Okay, so you have an incredibly varied background as a human being. You own Catland here in Brooklyn, New York, which is a magic shop, and you have an event space that you host. You also have written this book. You've worked on a magazine, which I have had the honor to be published in. You do a lot. And I was wondering, with The Witch's Feast, can you tell me what led you to this point? How did you decide this is what I want to write? This is what I am passionate about? Is something from your personal life, in your own cooking life, the thing that led you down this route?
Sure, yeah. So without going like too deep down the rabbit hole of history, I'm a born and raised New Yorker, grew up in Queens, and like as far as early influences go, there aren't that many people in my family who are culinarily inclined, shall you say. There's my grandmother, of course, who I think is responsible for my love of baking in particular, because that's where she excels. And my father, who aside from occasionally dabbling at home, was really more of a restaurant aficionado than a chef. So my early adventures in cooking they weren't something that I mimicked from the world around me. It's something I sort of genuinely fell into and found that I enjoyed and picked up as a hobby on my own and sort of experimented with without a lot of sort of roadmaps or anyone to sort of guide me through that. And though I've been cooking since I was 14, I'm not fully self-taught. I did graduate from Anne-Marie Colbin's culinary school, the Natural Gourmet in Chelsea, Manhattan, which is a wonderful, wonderful program that mostly focuses on like natural foods and like macrobiotic cooking styles. It's kind of a very, very different approach to food. And then I spent the early part of my 20s working in professional kitchens and bakeries, some of the best in the city, and really, falling in love with cooking within those spaces and being exposed to things that I never would have been able to explore, on my own at home. But, we all know that the restaurant industry is kind of, problematic, and it can be oppressive to stay in there too long. And it's beholden to a lot of like very tough and challenging labor practices that unfortunately are like industry standard, especially up here in New York. And it was that stuff that kind of led me away from professional kitchens in my mid-20s and into the bookshop that I currently own, which is, a much more relaxed lifestyle. I enjoy going home at normal times and not working till 1 o'clock in the morning anymore. And so Catland is, as you said, it's an occult bookshop. It's a community space here in Brooklyn. We do have classes all the time, pretty much every single night. We've got a whole host of readers, and, we're a fun little shop that really holds it down for the witches in New York. We're one of the largest spots where folks can like meet and get their tools and study. And it's a great, community to be a part of. It was originally founded by 3 gentlemen who passed the torch to me in 2015, which makes this Catland's 8th year in business, 9 years in February, which is it's really coming up. It's all come so fast. Life come at you fast. Yes. And, becoming a part of the shop and community is really what kind of kicked off my research and my study into magic and the occult. I did grow up around it a little bit. My mom was a medium and a tarot reader for most of my life. And so certainly a magical person herself exposed me to a lot of like these ideas. But Catland was really what brought me in contact with serious witches and serious occultists in a way that was like rigorous and like really got me very, very interested in the nerdy stuff, in the history and the research, and sort of threw me down the rabbit hole. And because of my culinary background, I was always kind of drawn to investigating kitchen witchcraft in particular, which I have to be honest, the more and more involved and well-read I became in magical work, the more and more dissatisfied I kind of became with like the corpus of kitchen witchcraft books that exist out there in the world. Many of them focus on ingredient correspondences and the medicine of food, which is great and lovely and helpful. But I really started craving a more historical, more praxis-driven approach. And it's from that research that I started to do on my own that The Witch's Feast was eventually born. It's the book that I really wish that I had when I was starting out with magical work and with kitchen witchcraft in particular. So that's where it comes from and sort of how it fits into my history. I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, that completely does. And I've known you for some time. I had no idea how deep your culinary training went. I am impressed. And I think, as I grew up in a Sicilian American household, and I understand the magic and the power in food. But you are right in that a lot of the encounters I've had with kitchen witchery have been, like you said, it doesn't delve deep into the history. And that's something that I fell in love with in your book. Everything, like I remember reading, about Babylonian spices. You're making a roast chicken with Babylonian spices. And, I read what you had to say about that. I learned something and I dived down a rabbit hole from there. It's just a beautiful, beautiful abundance of information that inspires me to really learn and connect with food in a new way. So thank you for that. I did want to talk to you about kitchen witchery a little more, if you want to dive into that topic. Since so much magic is rooted in the enjoyment of and the preparation of the ritual around cooking and feasting, I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on what feasting is and what ritual cooking and ritual eating is and what your ideas of kitchen witchery looks like.
Sure. Yeah. That was probably the most interesting part of the research. So much of modern writing on kitchen witchcraft kind of bills it as its own separate practice. Like you can be a kitchen witch or a green witch or a sea witch or whatever any of these modern denominations mean. But history actually shows us something pretty different, as opposed to other magical practices, perhaps even like green witchcraft, where you're working with plants. And we have this sort of large body of historical work and spells and writing to pull from. from, kitchen witchcraft is often hiding kind of in the crevices of history and sort of the scraps that we have from it. You find it in many different cultures and time periods and religious perspectives, but always in this kind of like marginalized way. And, I say this in the book, but it almost seems to be a practice that's too common, too like close to the mundane to take a seat with the rest of what's properly considered magical and metaphysical in all of these different traditions. And yet it always finds its way in there. For example, we have this in the book, but in the Picatrix, which is this 11th century Arabic grimoire of astrological magic, which is a very, very cool book that everyone should check out. It talks for hundreds and hundreds of pages about elaborately consecrating talismans to get kings to do your bidding and to blight crops and all the stuff that witches like to do. And at the end of the book, the author gives us this weird little magical hummus recipe as this funny little outlier, supposedly one which is meant to like cure us of depression and melancholy and never negative temperaments and all that. So certainly the recipes exist. They're out there. They're there within the grimoires and in the magical books and in the magical writing, but only in this like infrequent, hidden, marginalized way. And when we look back at history, particularly European history, which that's, my area of interest and my area of research, there does not exist a tradition of kitchen witchcraft to pull from. And a kitchen witch was not something that anybody ever was or would have considered themselves to be. Rather, what we see happening is that the prevailing belief is that by virtue of being a magical practitioner and one who works with metaphysical currents and one who claims the identity of witch, all of your life becomes transformed into tools toward that end, even the most mundane bits, like your feasting and your cooking rituals. And it doesn't get more mundane than cooking and eating. All humans on earth do it multiple times a day. And yet even here in these very sort of ordinary corners of history, we find practitioners who are using very, very, very humble ingredients and procedures to work very effective magic. So while like a unified tradition of kitchen witchcraft may not actually really exist historically, what this book does, or what I really tried to do with it, is we try to look at some of the surviving spells and charms and like dissect them and examine the techniques and the technology that's used to make them effective and say, all right, what unites these disparate charms and snippets and threads from history in common? And how can we sort of weave that into a theory of what a unified kitchen witchcraft might be today? So it's necessarily an experimental book. It's doing something that hasn't really been done before in a unified way. Not that I think we can or should unify it into a particular practice or religion, because that's not what I'm trying to do. But I kind of want to like suss out the tools of what it means from looking at this historical tradition. So when we say like, what is kitchen witchcraft today, I think it's largely still being defined because it is, as a standalone form of magic, a pretty modern invention. But that doesn't mean it's invalidated. That just means we get to decide what it's going to look like as the people who are sort of actively building that tradition now. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And I mean, you do it so well in the book. And it is a living tradition. You're right. There's a lot of different witches that I know that have suddenly started looking to the kitchen as a place of magic and a place of household protection and family and ancestry and ancestral magic. And I mean, I think it's high time we have a book that explores food, feasting, and why these things are so important and where they maybe came from. And I know that your book kind of tackles a lot of different recipes from around the world, which I think is an amazing aspect of it.
It does. And I kind of want to like interrupt for a second just to say that like I find that kitchen witchcraft is gaining a lot of momentum in the last few years, particularly after this very domestic period of quarantine where we're at home. All we have is the domestic world. No matter whether we're living in the country or we're living in the city, your whole life is reduced to just the walls you live in and your domestic rituals and routines. And so a lot of folks are turning to that and being like, okay, where can we enrich this? Where can we go a little bit deeper with this? And so it was just the perfect time to be writing this book and sort of thinking about these concepts. I wrote the whole book in quarantine when all I had was the house and the kitchen. Yeah, it was the perfect quarantine project. I was just testing recipes and writing all day long. And, with one cat on one side of me, one cat on the other side of me. And it was a wonderful experience. And it's great to see so many folks kind of gravitating to that now. I feel like the world is ready for this one. You know what I mean?
very ready. Just look at the trends of like cottage core and stuff like that.
Oh,
Like pastoral romanticizing of like the domestic. I mean, people, I think also beyond just being stuck at home, I also think people are craving a deeper connection to their everyday activities and hoping to make things more meaningful when they were just sort of like rote, like get through it, like let's eat, let's go to bed, it's done now. There's so much power and potency in the preparation. And I think this book, I'm not a great cook myself. I have struggled. But this book, there's a few things I've written down that I want to immediately try, especially this winter, during the long, dark nights, get into this place of magic that you so beautifully created and offered to us. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the recipes and histories and the ritual wisdom that you offer. On one hand, we have this magical, witchy exploration. On the other, it's food and recipes and very good recipes. Would a witch enjoy this book more than, say, a chef? Would someone who's really interested in history love this book? Who is this book for? Who did you intend it to be for? And is it kind of just for everyone? Because I think it is.
So, I mean, full disclosure, I wrote it for myself. And so, like, the best kind of person to enjoy this is going to be someone who's an absolute nerd like me, because that's what I am. That's what got me on this wavelength, was just craving more information about the subject and finding this sort of like blankness and emptiness and just trying to go a little bit deeper. So it's definitely a book for nerds. But that was sort of the hard bit in selecting the direction for this book. I really wanted it to be approachable, because I remember when I was just starting with witchcraft and with occult thought, and I remember how daunting it was to find information that was good quality and informative, but also approachable to someone who's just stepping into this world and just sort of trying to understand all the layered concepts that make it up. But I also wanted the book to present some useful magical praxis, where if you've only ever read this book as a book of magic, you would get some sense for how magic works and what a witch is and sort of where to begin if you want to go deeper. But at the same time, functionally, it's a cookbook. That's the way that it looks and the way that it feels. And that's very much what I wanted it to feel like. And that means that it's not like this heavy tome of magical operations and theory. It's going to necessarily have a little bit of lightheartedness to it. It's something that you're going to read in fits and spurts and short little snippets. And that's how I wanted it to be. So one of the ways that I kind of bridged that gap was by featuring a lot of like fun bits of historical trivia and lore and mythology, stuff that I think is really interesting to anyone, whether you're someone who considers themselves a witch or someone who wants to consider themselves a witch, or maybe you're just someone who's interested in, weird history. I think that, maybe a passing interest in magic and magical thinking might be helpful for working through the book. If you're not interested in those topics, maybe this isn't the one for you, sure. But even if you're just a home cook, think about the opportunity to bake ritual breads from like 300 BCE, or to recreate a recipe that Aleister Crowley made and served on a glacier in, Findesecal, England, or to make a dinner for your friend's zodiac sign that's like absolutely tailored to everything that sign entails. That stuff should be a cool enough prospect to get, I think, most people excited. So I think no matter what perspective you're coming from, you can find something cool within the book. I'm a triple Gemini, and so I really tried to put a lot of like little things in there, and it's broken up into 5 chapters that I think give you a good sense for what magic is as like a cross section without going too deep in any particular area. The first chapter is Feast of the Ancestors, which covers all the historical recipes, the traditional stuff from ancient history. We've got like breads from the Feast of Fornicalia in ancient Greece. We've got crepes from like Slavic festivals. We've got a lot of fun things in there. The second chapter is Feast of the Stars, which is our zodiac chapter, and every single zodiacal sign gets 2 courses. So you can make, a dinner for a birthday, something like that, a main dish and a dessert. Then we have a chapter on planetary magic, which is where we really start to talk about like practical witchcraft, how to get results. And it mostly relies on sympathetic correspondences, which, you know, come to us from ancient Greece. And so it's a fun system of working with the planets to get your magic done. Then we have Feast of the Earth, which is four-course feasts, one for each of the solstices and equinoxes. So very, very seasonal and like seasonal diets, seasonal menus kind of going on in that chapter. We talk about the Wheel of the Year. We talk about, you know, the procession of the seasons here on Earth and what that means for witches and magical practitioners and sort of the mythology associated. And then the final chapter is the Feast of Spells, which is all practical magical work where we take the tools that we touched on in the previous chapters and really put them to work and say, okay, if this is sort of what history gives us as far as kitchen witchcraft goes, what can we do with that now? And it's a bunch of recipes that are purely mine that were created just for this book. And yeah, I really had a lot of fun with them. So I feel like, I don't know, I feel like no matter who you are, where you're coming at it from, you'll get something out of it.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. I mean, you really do walk people through the systems and how it works. And I wanted to ask you, do you have like a favorite recipe or one of, you know, maybe one of the zodiacal sun signs, like which was your favorite to create? What was something that really stood out to you in this process that you loved doing? And what was, I would love to know what was kind of difficult for you to tap into.
Ooh, I mean, the most difficult bit was the research, really, and just trying to find this stuff because it really is so buried. And I had to rely on friends who'd be like, I was reading a book and there's alchemical candies tucked in the back of it. You got to look, you know, the research was very, very challenging because there really hasn't been a serious look at kitchen witchcraft historically before. And I'm not a historian and this isn't a scholarly book. This is a cookbook, you know, but there isn't anything like this out there. And there's no one who's sort of taking this mundane world of cooking and cooking magic very seriously. And so that I think was the most challenging bit. As far as favorite recipes, though, I do have two, and I actually want to share them with folks because they happen to be up on my blog. So I have links that I can share with people, you know, once I'm done answering your question. But I have so many favorites. And if I have to pick two, it's one from a flavor perspective and one from a magical perspective because I can't just pick one. Again, I'm a Gemini. I can't just pick one. But flavor wise, hands down, my favorite recipe in the book has to be this chocolate beetroot and grapefruit celebration cake. It's got all these big Jupiter flavors, very expansive, very rich, very decadent. It has to be one of the best cakes I've ever made. And it's so hilariously simple for what it is. The texture, the flavor, the recipe blows me away every single time. And it's a nice introduction to baking with sympathetic correspondences. It's a really, really fun one. Magically, what was that?
Absolutely delicious.
Oh, it's a good one. Yeah. Magically, though, I think the most complex ritual introduced in the book is the one for the Salem witch trials witch cake in the final chapter. Here we kind of looked at a piece of lore from the Salem witch trials in which you make a biscuit from rye flour and, believe it or not, the urine of people believed to be affected by witchcraft, which is then baked and you feed it to a dog. And if the dog starts to exhibit those same symptoms of bewitchment, you know, the seizures, the speaking in tongues, then it's believed that witchcraft was truly the cause of the issue and not, you know, epilepsy or something else like that. Right. It's a freaky little recipe. I love it because it's weird. But it got me thinking about using cakes and using bakes as a form of divination, sort of the same way that you would ask a question from the tarot or use a pendulum or something like that, and actually receive an answer through the bake that you've done. So we have this like brand new ritual created just for this book in which we do exactly that. We use consecrated ingredients. We make a simple rye scone, which when cut open reveals a yes or a no answer to whatever it is that you've asked. And it's very, very cool magical technology. And this is the one that I really, I think, put my heart into in the book. And I'm really excited to finally unleash that one on the world. It's probably one of the more complete rituals that I've like released for reproduction over the last few years. Both of the recipes are great and they're wonderful. And I think if I'm not mistaken, do we have our chat disabled? If we could turn that on for 1 second, I'd really like to share the recipes with everyone who's here. So I'm going to drop these links in the chat right now. And hopefully you guys can enjoy them there. It's the beetroot, the beet grapefruit celebration cake on top, and then the Salem witch trials cake on the bottom. And they've got the write-ups on the ritual and stuff there, so you can definitely go check them out. I try to put a couple of recipes up every week on my blog, so there's the other stuff on there that's great. But yeah, now you guys have those.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Now, I know you're having a launch in New York City in Catland.
Oh, yeah.
Are you planning on bringing any of these beautiful, delectable treats?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. We have I actually just finalized the recipe. There's a lot from the book that's going to make it in there. People are really excited about the bread masks, which are a fun part of the book. We do a whole entry on ritual bread masks and mask work in magic. And so those are going to be there. We're going to have a big selection of treats and cocktails. We're going to have some burlesque acts, actually, and a whole book blessing ritual. It's going to be a really beautiful, kind of romantic evening at Catland, which is fun because we just expanded. Catland took over the space that was next door to our shop for years, and so we are now triple the size. And so it's very exciting to, you know, be able to share all of that with everyone. This is our first live event in the new space ever. So
big deal. I mean, I've been to so many Catland events, and they're always incredibly beautiful. The space always leaves me feeling the space, meaning the space itself, and also you, and also everyone who fills it, and the magic that happens there. It always leaves me feeling hyper connected and tuned in. So I can't wait to see the expansion. This is going to be beautiful. If you all here are in New York at some point when this happens, or if you live here, please come. I think it's going to be incredible. So how
it's going to be on December 18th. I'm seeing that in the chat now. It's on December 18th, Saturday.
18th.
Sorry, Lisa. I didn't
No, it's okay. So we, I guess we have a few more minutes. We
do. Yeah. Let's go.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about, like, one of the things that I turn to household magic, including my very, very limited kitchen skills, is working in tune with the cycle of the planet, of the earth, of the seasons. It gives my life a sense of purpose and direction. And I think this book is a great way to live in tune with the cycles. How can a person, maybe if they want to become more intentional with time, with the season, with the planetary movements, with astrology, I guess, how can they use this book to tap into cyclical living?
We give pretty direct instructions for that stuff throughout the book. We give correspondences for all of the different zodiac signs. So if you're trying to work with a particular one that the sun is in, or a particular zodiacal season, we've got foods and flavors and recommendations for you there. We have them for all of the planets, of course. So if you're trying to work with a particular planetary sphere, for example, in the final chapter, we've got a lavender potato galette that is meant as a remediation for Mercury retrograde. So if Mercury retrograde is like a big problem for you, you're someone who's very, very affected by those cycles, this is a recipe that's meant as a remediation, as in, you know, the kind of work that we do to offset the negative effects by giving offerings to the intelligence of the planet Mercury. And all of that is sort of discussed in the book. And I think that, like, where we really sort of zero in on the cyclical living is the equinox and solstice feasts, where we have large correspondence tables in the chapter opener that talk about seasonal foods and seasonal flavors and sort of building menus around that stuff, and the benefits of eating seasonally, and what that sort of meant in terms of the large, like, feasting celebrations of historical Europe, and, you know, how this has been a part of human interactions for centuries and centuries and centuries, how it's only in the modern world that we are living completely detached from these, you know, very, very natural and very, like, I almost want to say, like, universal cycles. Like, they affect absolutely everything except for us.
It's so true. And it can be really dissociating. I've noticed living in the city, I've gotten farther and farther and farther and farther away from a sense of nature. And so I'm always looking for ways to tune back in and to feel more aligned. And
especially in, like, a landscape where you're not interacting with plants that frequently and you're not getting a lot of nature, one of the ways that it's always going to enter your house is going to be through the foods and the ingredients that you bring in. That's unavoidable. Like, you got to interact with it that way. So even for folks who are in cities who aren't getting a lot of nature interaction, you will always be interacting with it through what you're eating. So maybe that's another way.
I love that. And I think it's such a powerful way of bringing magic into your life, even if you don't consider yourself a witch, maybe.
For sure.
So I wanted to just go back to the chapter Feast of the Stars. It was my favorite. I love astrology. I've always been really drawn to discussions around it, the archetypes. I'm a Scorpio. I loved the pork loin with the mustard seed. I thought that it was such a perfect, strange, intense, hard to swallow taste. And I love how you made it approachable, delicious, because I think Scorpio can be approachable and delicious if encountered in the right way and treated the right way. I'd love to know, what was your favorite to create for that chapter? And how did you go about selecting the ingredients and creating, the recipes that you did for each sun sign?
Sure.
Because
I don't know.
world to choose. It just seems like there's such a world to choose from. How did you hone in? How did you narrow down? And what did the research process look like?
For sure, yeah. So I don't know that I have a favorite, but I can talk about the Feast of Gemini because that's the easiest one for me. I said I'm a Gemini. I've got 3 major placements in Gemini: my Sun, my Rising, and my Venus. So Gemini is kind of the name of the game for me, all 6 of us. So for the zodiac recipes, I had to look at a combination of traditional correspondence systems because there is no unified system. However, we do have sympathetic correspondences from ancient Greece, which were used through the Middle Ages and into today, which correspond plants and ingredients to the 7 classical planetary spheres, the Chaldean spheres. So the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the 7 spheres. So we can look at the ruling planet for a zodiac sign and get some sense from what the ingredients might be from there. So for example, for Gemini, which is ruled by the planet Mercury, we know that Mercury is going to rule aromatic, herbaceous plants that have like small and fine little leaves and flavors that kind of err towards like lavender and anise and are very sort of focused on the aromatic side. And because of Mercury's emphasis on speed and efficiency, we might extrapolate that into small portions, tapas style meals, grazing style meals. So we also, in addition to that, have this other tradition from European history called medical astrology, which comes to us from the Middle Ages and which corresponds ingredients to various parts of the body. So again, we know that if Mercury rules the lungs and the hands of the body, that the Feast of Mercury is going to be one that sort of encourages communication and sharing between people, because those are sort of the parts of the body that we want to be activated. So for the Feast of Gemini, with all of that in mind, what I presented was an herbed lavender fondue with roasted vegetables and crudités, something that can be served in sort of a large social setting where, guests can get creative, they can choose their own adventure, and it features those herbal flavors, all very in keeping with Mercury's correspondences. And again, this chapter, largely rests on my own sort of poetic interpretation of these 2 correspondence traditions layered over one another, which tells us sort of the energetic nature of ingredients. There's very little that's traditional or historical about my approach in particular, but I think that we arrive at something that captures the essence of each zodiac sign based on its nature and based on its rulerships, arriving at something that feels really right to me. I also tried to keep the flavors for each sign kind of confined within the season that they exist. So for example, like Gemini is late May, early June. I tried to use, ingredients that are around at that time. For the Feast of Scorpio, which occurs in the fall, I tried to use darker fall flavors, some stuff that you might find closer to that time, winter citrus, blood oranges, that kind of stuff. So you'll find that that's another element of it too. So there isn't a tradition that exists where we can be like, oh, Gemini rules such and such ingredients, but cobbling a few things together, you can make an estimation, and that's sort of where we went with this one.
I think it's beautiful. The poetic interpretation, I think, is something that sets the book apart. There are so many books, I think, that kind of rattle off things as if it's fact, and also books that deliver without any musicality or even the author's own, like, je ne sais quoi. And I love that your book really does feel like a love letter to food and to magic.
Yeah.
And, you use prose and idea in such a beautiful way. This book just feels like I feel like even someone who appreciates just beautiful language would dive. And I say this as a poet. So
Thank you.
yeah, that's
And
one of
also, like there's something to be said for magic. And this is the way that I think about it in my head, is that magic is a poetic relationship between the spirit that I have in my body and, the everything that exists outside of it, whether that's natural or unnatural. It all sort of exists within this very, very deep within the metaphor, deep within sort of the sensing and the somatic part of the consciousness, and not like the linear logical part of the consciousness, if that makes sense. Brian Cotnoir, who's an alchemist that lives and works in New York City, has a book about alchemy that he calls it the poetry of matter. And I just love that as a metaphor. And I think of witchcraft as like the poetry of existence in a lot of ways. And well, you said it right earlier when you were like, people put a lot of books out where they say that things are fact and they try to make it this very logical, very clear-cut thing. And it's really not. The thing that frustrates so many of my students when they first get into magic is that there are no hard and fast answers, and that a lot of things are up to poetic interpretation. And I just wanted that to carry over in this book and have it feel experimental and feel like it gives you a lot more freedom than it gives you answers. It gives you tools, and then it sort of sets you on your own path. Oh, honey, you're on mute still, I think. Gotcha.
All right. You hear me now? Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but I do think that empowering the reader in that way is such an important thing that I think, more authors who are witches should be doing, rather than coming off as omnipotent or all-knowing, when really this is a journey and it expands and it's growing and it's living and it's breathing.
Yeah.
And you really get into that.
And also, witchcraft is not a monolith. It changes depending upon where you are on the world, what time period you're talking about, who you're talking to. So, like, there is no one school of witchcraft. There is no answer to what is witchcraft even. That changes temporally and regionally, and it's all sort of expressed in different ways. And that sort of grayness of it and the ambiguity of it, I think, is like a value, whereas a lot of folks kind of turn away from it because it's challenging. I think it's one of the best bits.
I mean, that's it. It produces the most questions, but it also offers the most answers in its own way.
Absolutely.
So I have just a few more questions for you, and then I guess we can turn it over. If I would love to welcome anyone to put some questions into this Ask a Question box. If you've got them, please send them on through. In the Feast of the Ancestors chapter, I love that you pulled on the ancient world. And I was just sort of wondering if you wanted to share anything about your own ancestral lineage, and if any of that made its way into the book. Did you pull on anything from that?
For my personal practice and for my ancestral stuff, oh yeah, there's a bunch of that stuff in there. My personal work is pretty private, and I think that if a lot of my students and my colleagues were to look at the book, they would note that it looks pretty different than the kind of magic I normally do. And this is because the kind of magic I normally do is usually very religious, very devotional, very much held together by my relationships with spirit. And that doesn't necessarily make a very accessible book for a wide audience. But that's okay, because not everyone's magic needs to look that way. So I tried to make this very like non-theistic, more approachable system for everybody else. But I did my best to get a few gems in there that I think really represent my vision for how magic works and what its purpose is, and like just sort of my own ideas about magic. There's a bunch of bakes throughout the book that operate on the principle of offering and the principle of making effigies out of food to the energies that they're meant to represent, to the spirits they're meant to represent. One of my favorites is called the Master of the Woods cake, which is meant to represent this spirit and this intelligence of feral wilderness places, sort of this idea of a world without people in it. And it was created to look like an icon of those places. It's a cake that's covered in edible moss and edible flowers and meringue mushrooms, and it uses traditional forest flavors like blackberry and elderberry. And so this is the process of almost creating an icon or a statue or a devotional figure in food of whatever it is you're trying to work with. So that's a bit of my own practice. I also included, as far as my ancestral stuff goes, one of my grandma's traditional Croatian recipes is in the book. It's a dandelion and apricot frite or fritula. I think it's for the Feast of the Sun in the planetary chapter. And And it's these little fried ricotta donuts that are swirled with sunflower butter, and they're filled with dandelion petals and finely chopped apricots. They're real, real nice. And it's nice as for the Feast of the Sun because they have all these solar ingredients, these ingredients that are associated with the sun, the bright gold apricots, even the shape of them when they're done being fried, they're these tiny golden spheres that actually do look like little suns. And Baba was so proud when we told her that we included these because it's a hard recipe to make. And when she saw the picture, she said that I made them perfect, which I don't need another book review. Like, anyone can leave me all the 1-star reviews on Amazon they want. Baba says that I made the frita correctly, and that is a high compliment from a Slavic perfectionist like her.
Yeah, sometimes all you need is like an elder to say, "Well done, I approve."
That's all I needed. It was wonderful.
Oh my God, I love it. So, I guess we do have some questions here, and I don't want to go over time.
For sure.
Okay. So Sophie asks, this is very appropriate for the time we are in now. Do you have a favorite recipe or ritual, particularly for this time of year as we approach the winter solstice?
I do, and it's probably the winter solstice feast, to be honest with you. That one has a lot of cool things, and I'm trying to remember what's in that chapter. I think it's a sticky cranberry gingerbread. It is a mashed celery root, like whipped potatoes kind of thing. There's a roasted vegetables and lentils dish. And then there's something that's kind of weird, I think, on a feast table, but I felt like it needed to be included because I'm Slavic, so we do a lot of stuff with pickled eggs. And so it's a fire cider pickled eggs. And so if you're not familiar with fire cider, it's, if you're up in the Northeast, you probably heard of it. It's a remedy that comes from Maine originally. And it's against, seasonal maladies, colds, flus, that kind of stuff. It's an infused vinegar with a lot of heat-producing plants like horseradish, onions, chilies, lemons, rosemary, all that stuff. And we use that as the base for pickling quail eggs in the book. And so they have that sort of nutritive quality, which to me is such an important part of winter cooking because you're lacking in all the fresh fruit and the veg. So we're talking about preservation methods, and we're talking about getting as much vitamin and nutritive value into our food as we can with as little as possible. So that's probably like one of my favorites for winter from the book. But also we talk in that chapter about winter solstice traditions of scattering caraway seeds throughout the house to keep witches from stealing your butter. And so we talk about how to use your feast table as an altar to this by scattering caraway seeds and lighting red candles and using your pine boughs and your all of your evergreens, sort of to build your feast table as an altar to the winter solstice so that you can have your celebration there. That I think was one of the cooler bits from the winter part of the book. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love fire cider. I've been turned on to it this past year and have been really, really enjoying what it does to my body.
It's great.
Yeah, and tapping into it during winter, I think is I honestly do enjoy it in this colder season. I think it kind of brings a little sunlight into my veins.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's see. We've got another question here. Giovanna would like to know how you got into herbalism, if you don't mind sharing just a few bits on that.
Other than always being fascinated by plants, I think probably my entry point was the years I spent without health insurance. And I know that's not magical. I know it's pretty practical, but that's also what got me into fire cider is having to be resourceful and having to figure out how to give myself food and medicine and really take care of myself in a world that was not going to do that for me. And that is also the history writ large of herbalists throughout history and throughout, all magical lineages, magical and mundane lineages. It's folks who are in this world fending for themselves. So that makes a lot of sense for me. And again, I'm just someone who's hungry for knowledge all the time. And so when I'm interested in something, I'm going to read 6 books about it. You know what I mean? And I'm going to take classes on it. And I'm going to go really, really deep into it because I just want to understand how it works. If you're looking for a starter book on the subject, the one that really got me into it, it's called The Home Apothecary. And I want to say that the author's name is Stacey Douglas Wesselman or Westman. something like that. That's the book that really got me started, and it's got a lot of great recipes to begin with. It's not like a primer on like herbalism writ large, and it doesn't tell you about herbal actions and stuff like that, but it will give you the basics for like making your own cosmetics at home and just sort of getting your hands dirty with trying this stuff for yourself and seeing, does this work for me? Do I have an aptitude for it? Do I like doing it? Great place to start.
Thank you for that. I shared that in the little chat.
Thank you.
So yeah, if you all have more questions, keep them coming. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit more, they're curious about your journey into witchcraft. Your mother has a bit of a history, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
How do you identify within the community, and how did you find yourself, I guess, an everyday practitioner?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm an everyday practitioner, but I'd say that I'm a full-time practitioner, as in witchcraft is like my career. Which, if you had asked me 10 years ago what I was going to be doing in my early 30s, witchcraft, professional witchcraft is not what I would have told you. But, life is funny and you end up where you're supposed to be. It was definitely something I was always interested in as a kid. And of course, my mom encouraged this. But and I find that like most young femmes go through a period of time where they're fascinated by witchcraft and plant medicine and all that fun stuff. You make your little potions with your mud and your like 9-year-old friends in your backyard. Like everyone's done that. But
it resulted in a lot of poison ivy for me.
Oh yeah. But the world kind of beats that out of you. And I remember getting like made fun of for that. I remember people not taking me seriously for that. And so it was something that I put down for a number of years. And then I went away to college in New Orleans, which is a city that has a lot of magic flowing through it and a lot of magical traditions represented there. And that sort of ignited a little bit of fire back in me for it. When I moved back to New York after college, got involved in some of the occult community that's here. And it was meeting other occultists and really seeing like the diversity of this world, which you don't get from just Googling online. You don't get from just sort of reading books on your own, but really meeting other practitioners that ignited something in me where I was like, there's so much to know here. And I'm never going to do that if I don't start. And so I just sort of fell into it through meeting wonderful, fabulous people at Catland and other event spaces. I remember Tarot Society used to exist in New York, but now I'm dating myself. But yeah, meeting other serious practitioners who took themselves seriously and who weren't gonna dismiss me outright for being interested in this stuff gave me permission to explore it. And I think now we're in a time where like society at large is having their witch moment. Pam Grossman calls it the witch wave. It's this wonderful renaissance of interest in the occult where it is safe to ask these questions and to explore this stuff. I'm so grateful for that because I definitely didn't have that as a kid. And I know a lot of occultists who are even older than I am are just talking about how wonderful it is to have the ease of access to resources and a lot of new ideas that are coming out about occultism now that weren't around 10 years ago. All this experimental magical practices and stuff. It's fascinating to see and to be a part of. So I got into it a while ago and sort of fumbled my way in the darkness. And I'm grateful we're at a point now where folks don't have to do that as much. They can come to places like my shop and, to find all these books that are readily available online where they can begin their work, with good quality information.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had a similar journey, and I think, Catland, your space, what you do, the classes you have, really make being a practitioner of any sort, it makes it feel safe and welcome. And I also think this sort of book is the kind of book that like I might buy for anyone in my family or my extended family. And we're at a point now where I'm not sure that they would look at me weirdly. I think they'd be like, this is fucking awesome. Am I allowed to curse? Sorry about that.
Curse.
This is really cool because it is really cool and it's very educational. All right, we've got another question here.
Probably our last one for the night because I know we got to wrap up soon.
Yes, perfect. So they'd like to know a little bit about Catland and the history of the store. I know you said that it was passed on to you.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about it and maybe where you're taking it.
Sure. It was founded by 3 gentlemen who were Thelemites, which is Aleister Crowley's religion, and chaos magicians. So that's sort of their path and perspective. And they created it because they wanted to have a place that was kind of similar to a shop that existed in New York a long time ago called the Magical Child, which was an interfaith community space for occultists to gather and to get their tools. And they did a pretty good job of hosting events and parties and stuff like that. And you know, were really cutting edge, I think, at the time when they opened the shop in 2013 in bringing a culture and witchcraft to Brooklyn and to New York. Without, you know, Phil English and Joe Peterson, we wouldn't have Catland as it exists. We wouldn't have Brooklyn as the witch hub of New York City. But they both left Catland to pursue other things in their life. I think Joe went on to pursue like forestry or forest rangering, and I think Phil went into tech. But one of the original owners is still with us, and now Phil and Joe have been replaced by me and my business partner Dakota and our wonderful manager B, who, if you guys follow Brooklyn Witch on TikTok, you've definitely seen Catland, and you've definitely seen, you know, all the fun, sassy things they have to say about it, and what it's like to run a witch shop in 2020 and 2021. What year is it?
Yeah, who knows?
But so it's been in our hands for a while, and we took it in a more community-oriented direction. So we've been working with groups like DSA and like other activist groups to do, for example, like political rituals during all the protests last summer, or fundraising events for, I remember when Standing Rock was going on, we were doing fundraising and stuff for them. So we have definitely taken it into like an activist witch perspective. But we try to just mostly have a really extensive library on books from every single tradition that we can think of. Good quality writing. We're very like particular about like the kind of authors we allow into our shop and the kind of books we're going to have. And also a wide array of different tools that folks can use, and lots of in-shop education on how to use them, where they come from, and sort of giving people more perspective and I think more empowerment so that they know that they can pick their own adventure with magic, and that they're not just walking in and being like, I hear I need white sage. I should get that. Or I think I need a rose quartz. Like, you can now go up to our crystal wall and you can see where each of our crystals comes from, what it does, how you're supposed to be using it, and make your own decisions based on that. So I don't know any other witch shops that are doing that kind of like in-store shopping experience, but that to me is so important in sort of lifting the veil off of, you know, this world, which is very occult by its nature. It's very hidden, it's very recessed, and it's very hard to get into. We're trying to demystify it a little bit.
Yeah, you definitely do. It feels a lot more accessible than just walking into a space and being kind of weirdly ignored and expected to know everything.
Yeah,
which is
that's a lot. That's most of the cult shops. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's most of my, you know, teenage and young adult life. So I appreciate that, and I'm sure we all appreciate that. It's been great chatting with you about Feast. It's such a beautiful book. I am in love with it, and I'm grateful to have spent the night chatting with you about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate you being here. And thank you to Books and Books as well for having
me. Amazing conversation. Beautiful, gorgeous book. Get it at Books and Books. Don't forget, okay? And maybe we can do something. We have a courtyard too.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we can do something. Maybe you can guide us through some kind of feast.
That would be wonderful. I'd love that.
But this was just amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, giving us some insight into what this is all about. I can't wait to see Catland. The next time I'm in New York, I'm going to go visit. So thank you. Thank you to everyone watching, and have a great and magical rest of the year.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.